Anyway, good afternoon. My name is John Townsend, and it is my great pleasure as Dean of the College of Behavioural and Social Sciences to welcome you to another Sadat Forum with Dr. Jehan Sadat and Professor Shibley Telhami. It's a special honour to host on our campus two giants of American foreign policy, Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski, former National Security Advisor to President Jimmy Carter, and Mr. Stephen Hadley, former National Security Advisor to President George W. Bush. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. This forum could not be more timely. I might almost say, unfortunately, could not be more timely. The United States is facing enormous challenges in the Middle East as the Arab awakening continues to change politics in the region. The violence in Syria, can I say the butchery in Syria, has left many wondering what America and the international community should do to end the bloodshed. And the challenges posed by Iran's nuclear program have many talking about the prospects of war. Let us all hope that does not happen. Our guests today are especially suited for shedding light on America's policy choices in the rapidly changing political environment of the Middle East. The Sadat Forum, which is sponsored by the College of Behavioural and Social Sciences, is organised by a Sadat Chair for Peace and Development and its holder, Professor Shibley Telhami. Supplementing these events is deep and cutting-edge academic research that includes years of public opinion polls in the Arab world and Israel, as well as in the United States. Today, the Sadat program is releasing results of a new public opinion poll about American public attitudes towards possible war with Iran, the results of which are available for you outside this hall. To introduce our esteemed guests, I would like to present our own fellow and friend, Dr. Sadat. Dr. Sadat, well, she'll get another round of applause in about Dr. Sadat has been a tireless advocate of peace and women's rights throughout her life, and especially since her late husband, President Anwar Sadat, gave his life for the cause of peace. She's well known to many of you, for she's been a member of the University of Maryland community for 2 decades, and has helped the university to establish the Anwar Sadat Chair for Peace and Development. As the Egyptian revolution continues to unfold, hers has been a steady and insightful voice that we've continued to hear, including here at the university last spring. The University of Maryland broadly, and the College of Behavioural and Social Sciences particularly, have been really honoured to count Mrs. Sadat as one of us. It is my pleasure to present Mrs. Sadat to you.
Thank you, Dean Townsend, for your kind words and for your support of the Sadat Chair and the International Studies broadly. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce our honorable panelists of the Sadat Forum. But before I do so, I would like to say a few words about the Arab awakening that has been sweeping much of the Arab world, especially my great country, Egypt. In this regard, I want to welcome our Ambassador Sameh Shukri, who is here today. Egypt is, of course, going through challenges time, both economically and politically, as it transitions to democracy. I know that our panelists will discuss some of these challenges, but I want to make a few comments. Despite the enormous difficulties, I remain optimistic about the future of Egypt and in the greatness of our people. As I witnessed the remarkable changes that have already taken place in just over 1 year, I think much has been accomplished, though much more needs to be done. From the outside, the inevitable uncertainty of transition seems frustrating. But what Egypt needs is patience, understanding, and space to go through its inevitable transformation. Our people and leaders will, of course, need to do their part. One of the most difficult challenges of revolutionary changes is how to assess and come to terms with the past. For sure, there must be an accounting of previous injustices, of the suffering of the many, of what happened to innocent people. Healing starts only with such accounting. But to move forward, to build a better future, to come together as a great nation, we need to find it in our hearts to forgive, to invite all Egyptians to be part of our brighter future. My late husband, President Sadat, found it in his heart to overcome the bitterness and enmity of war and destruction. And forgiveness and reconciliation is what made our friend Nelson Mandela great. Egypt has many great men and women who will surely find their voices to help move our nation forward. Allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce our outstanding panelists. I will not review their extraordinary biographies, as that would take all afternoon. And I know that they are very well known to all of you. I will just say a few words. Zbigniew Brzezinski is a dear friend whom I had met early in his tenure as National Security Advisor to President Carter as he visited Egypt. He was a central architect of the Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel. And I know that President Sadat admired his brilliance and dedication. Since the days Dr. Brzezinski served as a professor at Harvard and Columbia universities, he has served his country in multiple capacities. He is currently a counselor and trustee of the Center for Strategic and International Studies and professor of American Foreign Policy at the Paul Nitz School of Advanced International Studies, Johns Hopkins University. He has thankfully never stopped writing and commenting on international and national affairs. And his newest book, Strategic Vision, just released in the past few weeks and available for purchase outside this hall, has been deservedly a bestseller. He is without a doubt one of the greatest strategic thinkers on global affairs of our time. Zbig, it is an honor to have you here. The Honorable Stephen Hadley has never stopped serving the United States. It is hard to find anyone in Washington, Republican or Democrat, who does not respect Mr. Hadley. He is known for his thoughtfulness, his openness to differing views, his consensus-building style, and his deep knowledge. That's why American leaders trusted him with some of the highest positions of the land, including as National Security Advisor to President George W. Bush. He has served in multiple administrations, both Republican and Democrat, including briefly with Dr. Brzezinski in Carter White House. Currently, Mr. Hadley is a founding partner of the Rice-Hadley Group. He continues to serve his country and co-chairs a bipartisan senior working group of the United States Institute of Peace, addressing American policy in the Middle East. He is an extraordinary American. Steve, thank you for taking the time to join us today. Finally, the panel will be moderated by our own Professor Shibley Telhami, the holder of the Anwar Sadat Chair for Peace and Development. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you are in for an intellectual treat. Thank you for attending.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Sadat, and thank you, Dean Townsend, for your leadership and support. Dr. Brzezinski, Mr. Hadley, it's my pleasure to host you in my home institution. I know I usually see you in Washington and all these other places, and I know that for some of you, this may be actually the first time to come to Maryland. So welcome, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I'm going to go ahead and start asking questions, but before I wanted to explain why you're surrounded by such beautiful art. If you notice, and Dr. Brzezinski, being married to a wonderful artist yourself, you appreciate that a little bit. If you see, we have a sculpture and we have a painting. And these are products of an annual competition we have, which is called the Sadat Art for Peace program. It is in conjunction with our outstanding art department. And usually the best painting and the best sculpture on the theme of peace. And these are the winners from the 2011. Let me tell you, the best winner for sculpture is Jesse Barrows for that piece called Earhorn, which is intended to represent hearing the voices of the people in the Arab awakening. And the painting is by Fauna Chow for a piece called 1 and 2. Congratulations to Fauna and Jesse. I don't know if they're with us. I want to congratulate them for winning that piece. Well, I'm going to go right to the substantive questions, and I'm going to start with you, Dr. Brzezinski, and not surprisingly, I'll start with Egypt. And I start with Egypt. Obviously, this is the Sadat Forum. Mrs. Sadat is here. But Egypt is not only an important country in the Middle East, but really there are a lot of central issues pertaining to American choices in relation to Egypt. And before I ask you about what we should be doing now, particularly with the crisis that came out of the NGO issue when the Egyptian judiciary took action against international NGOs, including Americans, that created a political crisis, I want to look a little bit before the revolution. I know that you have been a key player in mediating the Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel at Camp David, Maryland. When you look at American foreign policy over the past several decades, it really has been anchored around a particular relationship with Egypt and Israel. You can call it a triangular relationship. And that has clearly guided a lot of what the U.S. Does in the Middle East, and a relationship that was in some ways taken for granted, one can say, in ordering the American political choices in the Middle East. There were people even before the revolution who were saying that that really triangular relationship has run its course already even before Mubarak was removed. That Egypt went in to take its own path, to become independent, to regain its leadership role in the Arab world. It succeeded to do that, particularly in the 1990s. But in the past decade, there was less benefit. It was more marginalized. Egyptian elites were uncomfortable with the narrow set of choices that we're having, even before the revolution. And this is now obviously coming to the forefront, in part because the country has unraveled as we've known it. So I wonder, with your thoughts on this, knowing that you have considered the strategic picture during the Cold War, in which the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel emerged, and the new relationship between the United States and Egypt was defined, how you see that? Is this an accurate picture that that this relationship was running its course even before the revolution?
Well, thank you very much, Shibley, for having me here, and I'm delighted to be here. And I want to begin simply by reiterating my highest respect both for the late President Sadat and for Mrs. Sadat. Knowing them many decades ago was a source of inspiration and confidence, because in President Sadat we had a partner for peace who was endowed with remarkable intelligence and great strategic boldness. And I have to say, I particularly admired his strategic boldness. And it manifested itself in relationship to the two greatest issues that are involved in great strategic choices. It pertained to war, and it pertained to peace. And on both of these, he took enormously difficult decisions. And he gained strategic benefits from them, from himself, but more importantly, for his country. So it was a privilege to know him, and I know that Mrs. Sadat was a close partner, a confidant, a person who partook of these decisions. And in that respect, she represents today also the great message that President Sadat conveyed to us, namely the call for strategic boldness. Now, turning to your question, at this stage, if you ask me about the American-Egyptian relationship, I would not be advocating strategic boldness at this moment, because everything has to come in its right moment. I think Mrs. Sadat earlier in her brief comments used two words which, in my judgment, encapsulate what is needed. And these two words were patience and space. We have to give Egypt space to define itself at a time of considerable political turmoil and uncertainty. And therefore also patience. We have to wait until that works itself out. But having said that, I think it is absolutely essential that we do what we can to preserve a close strategic relationship with Egypt, because Egypt is the major player in the region. And a good American-Egyptian relationship is one of the key foundations of a meaningful and relevant American policy towards the region. If we have that relationship, we can also move on other issues. And of course, one of the issues on which we tried to move forward together with Egypt, and we didn't get as far as one had hoped, and subsequently we even stalled, is the question of the Israeli-Palestinian reconciliation and peace. And there's not going to be peace in the Middle East, real peace, without that. And worse than that, in the absence of that, other issues tend to become increasingly dangerous. And right now, our relationship with Egypt is additionally important because we could be on the brink if we make mistakes, if we are overly cautious, if we're not prepared to assert American national interests openly, we could be facing the conjunction of several significant conflicts in the area. In addition to the one I've already mentioned, which cries for resolution and which will never be resolved with direct American involvement, there is the risk of some conflict with Iran. If that should take place, it is almost inevitable that our current difficulties in Afghanistan will get greater, that Iraq will become more unstable, and that these unstable conditions could merge and intensify the ongoing difficulties in Syria. We could have a situation in which we confront a series of interacting crises in the region. So that cumulatively emphasizes the need for a broadly conceived and energetically undertaken American strategy in which, among the key players with whom we have to be engaged, in addition to the American-Israeli connection, is, of course, America-Egypt, America, Turkey, America, Saudi Arabia.
Now, when you endorse what Mrs. Sadat said about patience and space, does our political system really ever have patience? Can it allow space? I mean, you know, you have the NGO crisis, which on the big scale of things doesn't seem to be a huge crisis, although obviously important for those who are involved. And you had people calling for cutting off economic aid to Egypt. You have, you know, the Muslim Brotherhood do well in the elections. It made a lot of people uncomfortable. Do we have the patience? What does it take to have that patience?
Well, we better have that patience, first of all, because if we don't have it, we're going to be faced with other things which will not be very comfortable for us. And I've mentioned some of them. So we have to be patient, but we have to have a strategic vision for the region. I'm afraid we no longer have a strategic vision for the region, and worse, we are gradually being pushed out of the region. Or maybe we're drifting out of the region. I remember when I went into the US government, we had good relations with the four most important countries in the region: Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey. Look at those four today. One is still pretty good, but there have been some tensions. One is terribly bad. One involves some disappointment, and one involves a great deal of uncertainty. And you can all make the connections as to which one is which. It's not a very promising picture.
I want to come back to the strategic picture later, but I want to stay in Egypt for a minute. I want to go to Mr. Hadley. And the question I want to ask you is really a different set of choices for American policy in general in a place like Egypt. You were part of an administration that advocated democracy, particularly after the Iraq War, and certainly highlighted it and made it a priority in talking to the Egyptian government and other governments in the Arab world. And yet, really, until the Arab awakening, not much genuine changed in the Arab world. And I always wondered whether, in some ways, America is A, the best agent to create change, and B, whether, in fact, we're capable of doing it, given that we have the strategic conflict always. I mean, thinking then and thinking now about the role of the military, the role of intelligence. We were engaged in a war in Iraq. We have military forces in the Gulf. We have the Arab-Israeli issue that is central to our politics and to us as in terms of national interest. And every time we would push in one direction, orally or with NGOs, we still have to consolidate all these relationships with the very institutions that were anchoring the regime that was not democratic. So is that something that is inherent in American foreign policy that is difficult? How did you manage it when you were in the White House? And do the set of choices that we now face, correspond or are parallel in some ways?
The point is, what is happening, I think, strategically in this region is it is in transition. And it is in transition from authoritarian, hopefully, to a democratic and freer societies. Some societies are going through that transition post-revolution. Hopefully, some of those societies are going to go through that transition without a revolution in terms of some of the monarchies and the like. You said, can America make freedom and democracy? No. Can America impose it militarily? No, of course not. Can we impose it on other countries? No. Should we try to? No. Freedom and democracy is always going to reflect the particular cultural and historical character of the societies. But what we can do is make it clear that we stand on the side of those who want greater freedom and democracy and who want to take control of the future of their country. We were in the Middle East. That was a difficult role for us because for decades we were perceived rightly as being on the side and supporting authoritarian regimes, the very regimes that people in the name of freedom are rising up against. And it makes it us an odd messenger for freedom and democracy, but it is what we have historically stood for as a country for 200 years. Every war we've ever fought has been in the name of freedom and democracy. So I think, notwithstanding that history, something that President Bush talked about as a historical mistake. We have been on the side of freedom and democracy, and I think it still matters. I mean, I talked to a couple young people who were part of the Tunisian revolution, and they told a very interesting story. They said, you know, our revolution was stalled because the middle class was on the sidelines and would not join in the demonstrations against Ben Ali. And then he said it all changed with WikiLeaks. Now, I personally am not a great fan of WikiLeaks, so I was a little taken aback. And I said, so what do you mean WikiLeaks? And they said, well, WikiLeaks leaked a whole series of cables from the American ambassador in Tunis that made it clear that the Americans viewed Ben Ali as an aging, ineffective autocrat, just like we did. And once those cables became public, then it became okay for the middle class to shift, to join the people in the streets, and the revolution was over in days. My point is, by standing for freedom and democracy and standing back and let people fight and win their own freedom, because in the end of the day, they have to, we can nonetheless encourage that process and help empower that process. And that's, I think, what we need to do.
You know, it's interesting you said this about WikiLeaks. I went to Tunis right after the revolution, and that story was actually resonating about the WikiLeaks and its role. I always thought the WikiLeaks actually did disservice to the State Department. The State Department comes across as knowing a lot more than people assume, and usually professional, and people in the region actually saw it, that Americans were not lying to themselves most of the time about the people they're dealing with, and it was more positive than negative in my